Thank you all for coming. My name is Brooke Zimmers. I teach communication studies here. And we're going to put a couple questions up on the screen here while we wait for stragglers to come in. We were hoping you would start thinking about the answers to these questions for yourself. What is truth? What does it mean to say something is true for you? And how do you know it's true? How do you feel when you learn that what you thought was true was wrong? Okay, so maybe cogitate on that for a minute. You have some a handout that you could write your notes on, but spend a moment thinking about that while we just make sure we've got all the people who are coming here. Okay?
My name is Paul Herrick. I teach philosophy here. I've written out my remarks, and you have a copy of just what I'm about to say. The consensus in philosophy is that the most reasonable account of what we mean when we say that's true in response to a declarative statement is that the statement corresponds to the facts of the matter or reality. This is called the correspondence theory of truth, and it goes back to Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. The correspondence theory of truth is presupposed in every academic subject, as well as in ordinary discourse. For example, anthropology. If I were to say to an anthropologist, the Zulu people in southern Africa are an especially short people. On average, they stand 3 inches tall at adulthood. The anthropologist would say to me, that's not true. And by this, she or he would mean that statement does not correspond to the facts or to reality. History. If I were to say to a historian, Lincoln was not assassinated, he's still alive and lives in a basement room in the White House, the historian would say to me, that's not true. And by this, she or he would mean that statement does not correspond to the facts or to reality. Mathematics. If I were to say in math class, pi equals 5.5, the math teacher would say, that's not true. Pi, the relation between the circumference and diameter of a circle, equals 3.1415. And by this, the math teacher would mean your statement does not correspond to the facts or to reality. And in everyday discourse, if we were watching the Super Bowl and I were to say, my father invented the game in 1961, everyone there would say or think to themselves, that can't be true. And again, by that, they would mean the statement does not correspond to the facts or to reality. Now, this brings up the issue of objective truth. The correspondence theory of truth implies the existence of objective truths, statements that are true by virtue of the facts of the matter, whether or not we believe them. In other words, the facts make them true, not our beliefs or subjective feelings. The very claim that there is a distinction between truth and misinformation presupposes the existence of objective truths. Every test ever given by a teacher presupposes the existence of objective truths. Indeed, school doesn't make sense if there are no objective truths. Some people deny the existence of objective truths. However, they contradict themselves when they say objective truths do not exist. For their statement is itself a claim to objective truth. It is a claim to objective truth because it is a claim that that is the way truth really is, regardless of whether anyone thinks so or not. The denial of objective truth is actually a self-contradiction. How do we discover truth? The most basic answer is that we use trained and educated reason and observation applied to evidence. Notice that during jury selection, potential juries are asked questions designed to determine whether they will likely decide on the basis of good reasoning and careful observation applied to evidence, or on the basis of prejudice, poor reasoning, ignorance, or irrational desires. Some trial attorneys appeal to emotions, prejudices, and ignorance instead of reason and evidence in an attempt to sway the jury toward an unjust outcome. Sometimes their efforts result in an innocent person found guilty, and sometimes their efforts result in a guilty person found innocent. In such cases, we say justice has been denied. Truth and justice are connected in interesting ways, but we don't have time to enter the topic. Every academic subject employs reason and observation applied to evidence. Although each subject has its own specialized methods, reason and observation are employed in each nonetheless. And once again, every test in every academic subject presupposes the correspondence theory of truth and the existence of some objective truth. Tests are a waste of time if objective truths do not exist. In sum, the correspondence theory of truth makes the most sense of our attributions of truth and falsity in school and in everyday discourse. Objective truths exist, and we use reason and observation to discover them. And that's my contribution. Thank you.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? I'm Trevor. I'm in the math department, and I want to talk a little bit about math and truth. It's also my birthday today, so thanks for coming to my birthday party. Thank you, thank you. I sort of occupy kind of an interesting space. I was trained as a pure mathematician, and pure mathematics is about finding sort of consistent logical systems and truth in those consistent logical systems. Usually what you do is you have to assume a couple things that are true to sort of enter that system. These are called axioms. So if you're doing arithmetic, you assume that a thing is equal to itself. You can't prove that's true. You assume something like the reflexive property, where if one thing is equal to the other thing, then the second thing is equal to the first thing, right? These are sort of things that we assume are true when we walk into this logical system, and then we see what can we get to by deductive reasoning. So in pure mathematics, we can prove lots of things that are practical and useful, and we can prove lots of things that are sort of wildly esoteric, right? So we can prove things like reflective properties of conic sections, which give us satellite dishes and headlights and elliptical whispering rooms, right? We can prove that there's infinitely many primes, which, up until 50 years ago, like, who cares? Until we start thinking about RSA encryption and computer things. And we can prove like really wild esoteric things like knot theory, right? Shapes of knots. And who knows if that'll ever be useful or what it'll be useful for. But we can go and prove that sort of stuff in a logical system. So pure mathematics is really focused on getting to truth by way of reasoning, whether or not that thing is useful or not. And so statistics is a branch of mathematics, but statistics has sort of a fatal flaw that uncertainty is sort of built into the system, right? Uncertainty is part of doing statistics. So like Paul was saying, right, there's an objective truth. There is something that is true about the entire population. We don't get to know it, but there is something that is true about the entire population. And what we do when we do statistics is we gather a small subset, a sample. And so how many people here like pineapple on pizza? So like half of you, right? Okay, so what I would say is this is a sample of students from Shoreline, and we are making an estimate that about half of us like pineapple on pizza. And so when we think about statistics, one way of doing this is to think about, well, what if we could get repeated samples over and over and over and over and over and over and over again of students at Shoreline of about, 60 people. So I want to show you something real quick that simulates this. Let's see. Oh man. Okay, here we go. Okay, so this isn't exactly pineapple on pizza, but it's pulling orange marbles out of this, orange Reese's Pieces out of this machine. So let's take our assumption that about half of the people like pineapple on pizza, and let's pick groups of 60 people, and let's draw a sample. Okay, so this is like us walking into this room right now, right? 50 people, 60 people walk into this room, and these are the people that like pineapple on pizza over in orange. And what we found is we got about half of the people, a little bit less than half of the people. Let me show this in proportions instead. Oh, that made it go away. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to, instead of drawing one sample, I'm going to pretend we can do this over and over and over and over and over and over and over again. Okay, so let's do like 10,000 samples. And so what we wonder that every single sample is going to be slightly different. But overall, how do we expect those samples to look? And this is what we get when we plot all those proportions. And so the thing to notice, most of the time our samples look like 50%, right? Our samples should match the population, right? So that's a good indication of what the population looks like. But take a look at some of these kind of really interesting fringe cases, right? So if you do it enough, you eventually get samples that are way, way, way far away from what's actually true about the population. So this is what I'm saying about statistics, is that we can estimate what's true about the population, but sometimes we get things that are very, very different than the population. So even if we do statistics, the uncertainty is built in so that we sometimes get estimates that are very far away from what's actually true. So we can use statistics to find truth, but we can also be nervous that statistics sometimes leads us away from truth. That's all I have to say. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Thank you.
My name is Kira Wenstrom. I teach biology here at Shoreline, so that means I'm a scientist. So I'll be talking to you about the lens that scientists use to think about. All of my colleagues will tell you that every time I say the word truth, I have to use air quotes because, well, I'll explain why in a second. So scientists, what we do is we make observations about the world. And we see whether our observations about the world match our ideas about it, our thoughts about it. We give these things fancy names. So our observations, we sometimes refer to those as data. And our ideas about how the world works, we call those hypotheses. But you don't need the fancy words. Everybody in here has ideas about the world, and I would be willing to guess that just about everybody in here at some point has done some kind of test to see if their ideas about the world are true or not. For example, you might have the idea that the milk that is in the fridge has gone bad, right? What would you do to test this hypothesis? Smell it, yeah. Those of you who are very brave said taste it, which I would not be doing that. But you might smell it, and then you'd see, does the evidence, the data, support my hypothesis that the milk is sour, right? Honestly, it's as simple as that. So one common idea is, I think the full moon makes people act really weird. We've had that idea for thousands of years. But guess what? We can test this. You can actually do experiments, or at least you can look back and look at previous data to see if this is true. And this is a paper that's been published in the Journal of Affective Disorders. It's called The Moon and Madness Reconsidered. And in fact, the first few sentences of the abstract say, belief that the full moon is associated with psychiatric disturbance persists despite 50 years of research showing that there is no association. Sometimes our ideas are really sticky, right? Sometimes despite lots of evidence, we still continue to believe things that don't appear to comport with the evidence that we have generated. And in fact, the last few, I think I cut them off, but the last few sentences of this abstract talk about whether we think it may still be true in this certain narrow way. We're going to keep testing it. That's what scientists like to do, is like crawl into every small corner of evidence and see maybe somewhere in there it might be true. So there we go. Truth in science means well supported by the evidence. That's why truth, I can't hardly say it without using quotes, truth changes because our evidence changes. We collect better evidence, we do better experiments, we discover that there was some flaw in our previous experiments, or maybe it was a statistical anomaly, right? There's a lot of reasons why the evidence that we thought we had to support a particular fact might change. That is completely normal and accepted in science. Also, remember who's doing the science. It's us, people. People make mistakes. People interpret things differently. People have biases. And we should never, never forget that even though science is, in my opinion, the strongest and best way we have to understand how the world around us works, it's still people doing it. People are still flawed. So we have to keep that fallibility in mind. Where misinformation comes in, several places. Some of them are very benign. In some cases, it's just sort of an overhyping of scientific results. So when there's something cool that happens in the world of science, you might see it in a newspaper or online, a big story about how, I don't know, eating beets cures cancer or something, right? And then you go look at the actual study and find out this, like, it was done in 30 lab rats somewhere where they fed them nothing but beets for 2 years and they all died of beet poisoning instead of cancer, right? So I don't know, I made that up. But but that is really common. You'll see the big headline, beets cure cancer, and everyone's like, I'm gonna go eat a bunch of beets, right? And then they find out later, oh, sorry, beets don't cure cancer. Like, new studies show something different. And so a lot of it is just sort of overhyping of scientific results when scientists themselves are often really careful about that interpretation. Something a little bit shadier is using jargon. Science, if you've taken, many of you have probably taken science classes before, there's a lot of new terms, new vocabulary. And that jargon can be used against you to confuse you. Lots of times, somebody wants to sell you a new weight loss drug, and they'll use a bunch of fancy words to explain how this is so wonderful, and you're like, well, that sounds really sciencey. Think I'll buy that stuff, right? So sometimes people are using people's confusion and confusion about science against them. And the worst of all to me is when people will twist the very nature of science and use it against scientists. That is terrible. I started to use a different word. But for example, you will hear people say, oh, well, those scientists just keep changing their minds. They don't know what they're doing. Rather than celebrating the fact that, yeah, we change our minds when the evidence changes and supports it, we'll change our minds. You mean you don't do that? You just keep believing the same thing regardless of what reality tells you? But so to me, that kind of misinformation is kind of the darkest form of misinformation that, that's in the realm of science. Okay, that's it for me. Thanks. Who is?
Hi, I'm Crystal. I teach computer science here. I don't think I see any computer science students, so you're all get to be computer science students for the day. So I'm going to talk about technology and how kind of technology has, I think, changed the way we see truth and misinformation in a lot of ways. So there's a lot of words up here. There's 3 major points that I want to talk about. So the first one is that technology today is often seen as content neutral when it's not. So we take things that we see on the internet sometimes, or if we ask Siri or Alexa or somebody some question and then we get an answer and then we're like, oh, that must be correct, right? That must be true, when reality is it might not be true at all, right? So there's this piece that I think we heard this, I was taking notes as people were talking. Trevor was talking about, oh no, this is my comment. Like when Trevor put up that simulation of the candy machine, right? Well, somebody programmed this algorithm that was showing us what was happening, and humans are flawed, as we said. So what if the developer who created that simulation just did things wrong, right? And then we have that come out and we're like, oh, look, this is what the graph looks like. And we're like, well, this is true. Look, the simulation made it. And we're like, but maybe it's not true, right? Because algorithms are behind the way we see technology or the output of technology, and it's humans who are creating those algorithms that show up. This comes into play when we think about how systems of oppression show up in what's happening and the lack of diversity in the tech world, because we have a certain demographic, homogeneous demographic for the most part that makes up the people who are developing the algorithms that we see. It means that we create software that might have a lot of biases in it. So if we think about facial recognition software and how some places might use that to identify criminals, whereas maybe those people aren't criminals. People have just made the software in a way that's flawed, right? And then we take it as proof. There's also things about how medicine is given to people and algorithms that kind of advise who do you give what kind of medicine to? And there's research behind, sometimes that's flawed, right? Because those algorithms are flawed. Second main topic is that technology allows information to spread much more rapidly than in the past, right? We get information very, very quickly, and we get lots and lots of information. If you talk to your parents or people from 10 years ago, 20 years ago, even 5 years ago, the amount of information that we saw was very different than what we see today. And there's lots of different information that comes out. And so we have to recognize that information's moving faster. A lie can spread much faster than it could in the past. So think about social media and emails and advertising and how all that's changed in the last couple decades. Also, our feeds are curated for what we want to see, to be in alignment with what we think, right? If you ever picked up somebody else's phone or looked at somebody else's computer screen over their shoulder and you're like, what is that? Like, I have Instagram too, and mine doesn't look like that. I don't see those things. And that's because the algorithms we're training algorithms when we interact with them. When we hold on an image or we like a video, then we start seeing more of that, right? And we start seeing less of the things that we just scroll past. Well, what's that doing? It's creating this confirmation bias of the way we get information and what information we get. And so then it changes our reality related to the facts, right? When we think back to what Paul was sharing, he was saying our truth is defined by how it aligns with the facts. Well, what if we're interacting with this algorithm that's then creating facts for us that are not in alignment with what other people are seeing, right? It changes everything. So we're getting constant information, we're having constant confirmation bias, meaning we're seeing the things that we expect to see and that align with our beliefs, right? The last thing is that technology today allows us to maliciously create fake news or alternative facts, right? So technology now gives us this ability to create either spread a lie maliciously much faster than it would have in the past, or to just create a completely fake sense of information. I think Kira was sharing like this weight loss example and how you might get some information and then it'll change. I don't know if any of you have seen, I've seen these things about like Shark Tank, and they have like the Shark Tank judges or the sharks supporting this weight loss thing, and it's like completely made up. Like a computer generated this picture of these sharks saying this thing creates weight loss, and then people buy it and it's a big scam and they take all your money, and that's because somebody created this deep fake. They're making something look like something it isn't at all. So we're just creating facts that aren't actually facts. Those are all my things. Sorry?
All right, so I'm Brooke Simmers. I teach communication studies here, and I think I'm just going to define what Crystal was just talking about. Communication scholars, what we're interested in and what we believe is that we all, through our communication, co-create meaning, if that makes sense. And so the social construction theory is this idea that everything you know to be true has been taught to you. And what Crystal's talking about, right, is we can design algorithms, we can create things that's going to feed you information, and you're going to think that's true. And to Paul's point, right, he said that how we arrive at objective truth, we use trained and educated reason and disciplined observation applied to evidence. But what if I grew up in Illinois and we worship President Lincoln and everyone in my community believes he lives in the basement of the White House? And that is all I've ever been taught. That's it. That's my whole reality. Because communication, right, the ongoing symbolic process by which humans create, maintain, repair, and transform reality through social interaction. So what I know to be true is that President Lincoln lives in the basement of the White House. And I don't have access to the White House. I don't have access to evidence that proves differently. My whole experience is that he's still living in the basement of the White House. And it's verified because the algorithms on my media and my Instagram or whatever keep showing me that because they know I live in this little community, right? So what I'm interested in is, while there might be an objective truth, I think we all experientially have a sense of what our truth is. And it's been taught to us by our families, by our communities. You might believe that the United States is run by a cabal of lizard people. There's a surprising number of people who do believe that. So, I'm serious, right? They do believe that. So this idea of like what is truth, we can't deny that we experience and have a sense of truth by everything that's been taught to us. And I thought that was interesting what Kira said. Like, here was this scientific research article that says, yeah, the moon maybe doesn't really have anything to, and they still, like, right, they still want to believe that it does. And I can tell you my experience of how I move through the world. I hang on to those places that I want to believe are true or that I've been taught are true. Our notions of race, our notions of gender, they've all been taught to us. And then we think that it's true. We think it's true there's just men and women, let's say. We think it's true. So I offer you this because while I'm not denying that there's a path to objective truth and that we use science and evidence, but we can't deny the fact that what if you don't have access to the evidence? What if you haven't been taught what critical thinking is or what it looks like or how to do it? I mean, maybe I'm just making a really strong argument for you all being here, right? You all being in an educated space, you being in a place where we're learning how to examine evidence. It's why education is so, so important. I am a firm believer that you can't reason yourself out of something you haven't reasoned yourself into. And there's actually lots of very interesting research right now that's happening called deep canvassing, where we're going into communities and trying to change people's minds. This is the kind of segue to talking about misinformation. And basically what they're saying, Paul, is that using facts and evidence is not the way to go. You will not make any headway trying to convince someone that something is untrue by using facts and evidence. I find that fascinating. I would think that we would be able to use facts and evidence. But we attach ourselves so deeply to what it is that we believe. The research is showing that to help change people's minds, we have to get them to unravel how they've arrived at why they believe what they believe. And we do that through a series of questioning and getting them to reflect on how they've arrived at what they believe, if that makes sense. But if it's anything, I guess, you take away from this, it's that communication, we co-create meaning. And what we have access to in terms of what is truth, what is the evidence, what is whatever, is who we have access to and how we're interacting with that information. Okay, now I'm done.
Hi, my name is Lauren Bryant. I'm so glad you're all here because I'm a librarian and this topic means a lot to me. I care very much about how information is distributed, how it is communicated to others, how it is created, and how we process that information. And we've talked a lot about that today. I'm so glad that we did because you are being inundated with information as students, and you have your own lens. So I want to talk about primary sources. I want to talk about different fields and what that means. And I also want to talk about how you can get access to information. So publishing used to be, one of the things that we talked about is how information is being distributed so fast. One of the things in information literacy, librarians are also called information specialists, which I think is really fun because we are very fascinated with how the behavior behind information seeking happens. As a web developer, I'm a librarian and a web developer, And I care a lot about how you seek information. I've done a lot of research personally on how you look for information because I'm supposed to make the website in a way where you find it. I want you to find that information. So publishing used to be kind of this old-fashioned process where we vetted things and we would like examine things and the publisher would look at things. But we have created this way where people whose voices would have been diminished can now publish on the internet anywhere. So this is a wonderful thing to celebrate because it means that if you weren't a scholarly person, you could still publish. If you weren't, you didn't have access to, you didn't own a newspaper or have access to a friend with a newspaper, you can still go on the internet and publish anything you want. The downside is that you can spread information that maybe not be true. And one of the things I challenge you to do is look behind the person and the authorship of everything you read. Because when you look behind that person, you're going to see science, or you're going to see communication, you're going to see computer science, you're going to see all these wonderful things. And the expertise often backs up what they say, and sometimes it doesn't. But I think one of the things that's really important also in looking at authorship is privilege, because when we have a lens, and unfortunately, historically, scholarly sources have a lens of white, traditionally even male in the early, we know that some institutions in the United States only had male students and professors at a certain point in time. So if we look far enough back, you can see that the lens is starting to get more diverse, thankfully. As a librarian, if you come to me and you say, I want to know about social media addiction, I can show you something from a journalist. I can show you something from a scientist. I can show you something from a developer. And all of those lenses will be different and wonderful. And you're going to hold this, I like to think of it as a gemstone, not necessarily a perfect gemstone like a diamond, but think of it like an amethyst where each side is a little different and each side is a different person's perspective. But you get to see how one side might be really big and really easy to see from far away, and maybe one side's not so easy to see when you turn it. So I would challenge you to think of the truth like that, and make sure that when you're looking for the truth, you put it down and look at all the sides, and you have your own lens that you're going to digest that through. And I'm really glad that you're learning all this information and you're living in a place and a time where you get this information so fast through the internet. But I challenge you to be critical and to also, when you're not sure, there are so many people that have an agenda and a reason for making you believe information. I'm here to tell you that a librarian doesn't have that agenda. I, of course, have to promote the library. Go to the library reference desk. We love seeing you. If you want to find the truth, we don't have the truth for you. We have information sources, and we're here to tell you how you can find the truth. And next time, you'll be like 10 steps ahead because you'll be like, I know how to use these resources that don't have bias or have less bias anyway. So yeah, that's what I have to say. I have some resources to recommend, especially this Algorithms of Oppression. I love that some of my colleagues have mentioned that technology, it has a lens too. So we have lenses in every source that we give you. I'm really glad that you're all here. Thank you so much for listening. And I'm done.
So I want you to share your thoughts about what you just saw. If any of you have any I don't know, any points of agreement or any points of disagreement? Anything that really like struck you as interesting? Please share.
Well, I just wonder, somebody talked a little bit about sort of evidence that you don't have access to, and that I would say is the majority of the media that we get. We don't necessarily, when CNN or Fox News report on what's going on in Ukraine, I don't have any access to that information. When, other than when they, quote a source and the source is speaking, but still I don't have access to the information. When, I'm supposed to consider the New York Times to be a trustworthy publication, they often cite unnamed sources. Now all of a sudden, Seymour Hersh comes out with an article and cites an unnamed source, and Snopes is all over saying this article relies on an unnamed source. Well, so do the majority of the New York Times articles. So do the majority of CNN's articles. And so when you don't have access to the evidence, then you're sort of stuck with your biases and your feelings and your...
Yeah, that's a great point you brought up. So we should be skeptical about the sources, resources that we have access to. I think that's one of the things you're saying, is that New York Times and things. But how can we what do you feel like we should do to gain better access, or to feel like we have more of we're headed more towards the truth space? What would you do? Like supposing you read an article in the New York Times and you wonder if it's true, but you want more. You want more access. You want more resources. And what do you think? What would you do?
I'd probably look at the coverage from a different perspective and see which ones of their topics are matching and which ones are not, and then probably from there go into more specific topics and do the research on those specific topics. The ones that they both align and the ones that are contradictory of each other.
Okay. Any other thoughts? Good. That's good. What would you do? Maybe right now you're learning about what to do from these instructors. What did you learn from the instructors that you just heard what to do, what you can do?
Talk about it with other people.
Talk to other people. What and how would that help you?
To see what their opinions are, or what kind of sources they've looked at before, or how they came across that information, and having just kind of doesn't have to be casual or serious, just trying to get as much facts.
Okay, so that's a really interesting answer. I think that's a really good answer. Talk to other people, because how would you benefit? Give me some more ways you would benefit by talking to other people. A different perspective outside, like your own, Brooke was talking about how the internet, Brooke and Crystal, about the internet just feeds you your own stuff. So it's a way maybe to step out of that space, and your hand was up.
Different perspective allows you to create your own perspective, and truth is all about interpretation.
Okay, so you get different perspectives, and you kind of can gain, or you're saying they contribute to your own building perspective. And what would be the flaw in talking to other people?
They're getting their information from the same sources. They are biased themselves. Yeah.
They might be in your space and think like you. They might not necessarily give you alternative, but it's definitely a place you should go. But also think, who are those people? Are you reaching out to people who think differently, or who have expertise or such? I'm going to also ask the other instructors who gave their lessons, do you have any questions for the students that you want to pose to them? Or are you going to be equally quiet? Okay.
If you, this isn't for anyone to answer necessarily, but if you used, let's say, ChatGPT or Course Hero or Chegg to find an answer, do you take that at face value, or do you think maybe this isn't the right solution, or the truth, the thing that should be here?
That gets to really interesting stuff, right? Chat, GTP, like where, so you're saying like if you get information from there, is it true? Yeah.
GPT is actually 2 years old data that it doesn't have, and so to go to Kira's point of the evidence changes, right? As we learn more things and science, we do more hypotheses and things like that. Or if we're getting data from that's lagged by 2 years, then maybe that information's wrong. Or if you, I mean, I spot Chegg answers really quickly because I'm like, this is bad. Like, this isn't even good. And that's how I find it really fast. So, I mean, it's all fun.
But morality and truth come into this picture here, because I joined one of the cheating websites to see what's going on there, and I pay $5 a month. I'm going to drop out after another month, but I'm looking around, I'm seeing some of my assignments in this website. But if a student copies something off a cheating website, hands it in as their own, what they're doing is they're presenting something as their own that is not their own. So now we're back to correspondence truth again. They're claiming this is their own, but that's actually false. It does not correspond to the facts. The fact is they took it off a cheating website. So not only is it false, there's something immoral about turning in work as your own that is not your own. So truth has something to do with morality too.
So 2 reasons why not to use ChatGTP. One is the information you get is just coming from the internet, which we've talked about is full of biases or full of things that might be not as true as it is now, outdated, and also it's just you're calling it your own when it's not, which is untrue. Any other thoughts about, any other questions for any of the instructors?
Oh, hey students, what do you use to look things up? I'm really curious about this. Let's say you wanted to disprove the moon theory. Like, tell me what you use to look things up. Did somebody say Google? And what do you click on when you look it up in Google? What do you click on?
Currently, one of the first things I'll pop up is Wikipedia.
Wikipedia.
It's going to be more extensive than that. You can read through that, but then there's source at the bottom. So
And you look at the source at the bottom.
Sources on that article.
I use that all the time, honestly, and I examine the source, and I'm critical of that source. But I'm not here to tell you Wikipedia is bad. I'm just here to tell you that people edit Wikipedia constantly. But it's not bad. I think you should use that. Does anybody else have an answer for me? I'm really, truly curious about this. Yes?
If I'm really going in on it, I'll use Google Scholar.
Oh, I love it. Thank you. Google Scholar. Did you guys hear that? That's a really good answer.
Google Scholar.
Yeah, heck yeah.
So we got time for one more person. His hand is up.
Oh, that was the same.
Thanks, then Google Scholar.
So we're ending with Google Scholar. Okay. Thanks for coming. It's great to have you here, and clap for all the instructors who presented.